As you can tell, and thank you, Martin, this is a very friends affair and a very passionate affair also, what we're going to talk about today. And Maya, that was super. I don't know whether you're still in the room, but that was exactly the fabulous. It was fabulous. And also thank you for bringing the global balance sheet piece into this. Appreciate it. So we start, I think, with the introduction Martin already gave of you, Johan, and enlighten us on planetary boundaries and why invest in nature at this very point in time. Resource constraints, attention constraints. So alert us on the overall picture.
Yeah, let me give you a quick summary. And given the fact that this is a finance discussion, you've seen probably the recent most updated study that nature contributes within the order of $44 trillion to the global economy, roughly 50% in direct value to nature. I think it's good to start by concluding that that's a wrong assessment. Everything that we depend on in the economy originates from nature. There is simply no well-being, no stability in society. There's simply no future for humanity without the richness and the beauty and the functioning and the response diversity, which has been the encapsulating discussion here. And we have the evidence of this. And of course, I could spend a whole seminar on what tends to be the primary focus on all the evidence of nature's contributions to people. As you all know, food, air, biomass, fibers, everything that we build our well-being on. That's one thing. Let's put that aside, because as an Earth system scientist, that's not my primary concern today. What is on real red alert, the real fundamental red alert, is that we are in the 6th mass extinction of species, where, by the way, the 5th mass extinction was 65 million years ago with the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs on planet Earth. So it's quite a massive change occurring as we speak, just as Prince Hussein pointed out. This is making us lose resilience. We're losing the very fundamental stability of the life support systems on Earth. That is the fundamental threat. Because we know that biodiversity not only gives us all these direct services, it also regulates the stability of everything we depend on, from the marine systems, the ice sheets, the forest systems, the wetlands. Every function that we study in terms of risks of approaching tipping points depends fundamentally on the living species and the diversity and their functions. 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries that regulate the stability of the whole Earth system are in the red, and the reddest of them all, I'm afraid to say, is biodiversity loss. So that is the number one concern we have today, and it's the one that we put on the back burner because all our focus is on climate. And let me just close, Solveigh, to say that we can today say without any hesitation from climate science that we will fail on delivering on the Paris Agreement. We will fail on the Green Deal's efforts, Ursula, regarding 1.5 degrees Celsius, unless we both phase out fossil fuels and protect nature. Because nature provides us with 56% of the buffering of the Earth system. You could put it just very simple to close. 150 years of damaging energy system on planet Earth, and Mother Earth has functioned as a protective mother of a naughty kid, buffering and helping out to reduce the impacts. So we have the biggest subsidy of them all to global economy is the fact that 56% of carbon dioxide is taken up by nature, and we are destroying that capacity. We're seeing the first signs of losing that buffering capacity. That is what makes us and the Earth system science most concerned today.
What stuck with me was the quote just before. It's like burning a Renaissance painting for cooking in terms of efficiency.
That's right.
So if that's the most urgent priority we have, and like all the dramatic dimensions you just laid out, why aren't we all in on this? Like, what's the funding shortage? Why do you think this is not as urgent and as funded as it should be? And then how do we bring it back to the financial system?
Well, I think there are a few explanations to this. I mean, one thing is clearly that we've taken nature for granted.
Yes.
And it is because nature is so forgiving and has had this phenomenal capacity to shove under the carpet for so long the negative impacts that we've been causing. So it isn't until the last 30, 40 years that we're starting to see nature sending invoices back to the economy. So we're kind of at quite early phase in those terms. That's one explanation in my view. The second is that, admittedly, we have so many factors in our society that we are concerned about, and nature has dropped down, quite far down. And when we talk about sustainability, we tend to wrongly translate that to climate only. And I say that as heading a climate science institute, that we have to understand that we have to take a whole Earth system approach, including biodiversity, to solve everything that has to do with human well-being.
Thank you for saying that frame. I think it's an important frame for us to think about in terms of the role of finance and also how to value nature so that we can then value it and invest in it to make sure that funds flow in a minute. Martin, you're building something very exciting with the Landbanking Group. What are you setting out to do, and why is that so important in order to have the funds flow for nature?
Look, the big picture story is this, and we've heard it all day. So we are discussing nature here, not because there's a question of having another Nationalpark in the Steigerwald, or this is a question around our current model of human prosperity and potentially continuance. And how did we actually get ourselves into a situation where we have a 5 million years anomaly on climate and a 50 or 60 million years anomaly on biodiversity? Ever since the beginning of the industrialization, we have been accruing more and more produced in financial capital. That has been growing very fast. We've been measuring it very well. We had the same, not just as steep, with human and social capital. And now there is one theory of growth that actually says, look, that actually has been triggered by the combination of capital and labor. I don't think that is empirically robust anymore. What has really happened is that we have depleting natural capital all the way to breaking point. And that's where we are now. The bank is empty. And that's a precarious situation because for the first time now is when we need it for climate reasons, and Johan is so well in explaining how that is the other side of the coin. Economically, we feel it. You probably feel it in your portfolios. There's really crop failure. There's really the soils are not holding the water in the Ahr Valley anymore. There's really the breakdown of fisheries due to the lack of reefs. So for the first time, it starts hitting us. And as the bank is empty, this is, and we have emptied out natural capital, it's almost a Wiederaufbau moment. So it's a reconstruction moment, a 1943 moment, where we actually have to reinvest into the infrastructure that keeps our societies buoyant in the way we have done it back then. And we don't have any good ideas. Currently we are only dealing with old money, and you do and we have some 120 billion actually that we are dealing with to maintain a piece of infrastructure that needs $1 trillion to be maintained over the course of a year. And that we don't have. And I think we won't find it even if we are even optimizing, professionalizing as much as KfW, for example, does with outcome-linked bonds and for nature swaps and grants and project finance. I think we will only find it if we widen the parameter, and that is something that the economists call a nature-based economy. It's something that the sociologists call a new conception of wealth, and it's what the accountants call boringly nature on the balance sheet. So we have to recognize nature as a source of future benefit and prosperity. And the exciting thing is, for the first time, this is not only a vision, I think it's a possibility that we can do. There's two things wonderfully coming together. One is something that we in this room can actually deliver, to build the financial infrastructure that gives every pixel of the planet an ecological passport, a nature capital account where we know how the biophysical stocks of biodiversity, of water, of carbon actually accrue. That allows us, that nature capital account, for the first time to have a fair, equitable handshake between a land steward, those who are providing the nature capital, and all of us who need it. In the past, we haven't had that. And because we have this nature capital account, because we have this underlying, we can create contracts that can turn into nature-based assets, securities, economies, currencies. Why not? Bretton Woods 2.0. So at least technologically, for the first time, we have the ability to do that. It's hard, but you've seen the wonderful whatever, Kat and Alex, and I could go on, where we are building this technology. The second thing that we need, however, we need to change the way in which we are actually dealing with value in the economy, and that's something where politics comes in. The first thing is, currently there is a tsunami of risks running towards us because all these nature-related risks are not yet in our accounts. We are fiduciarily obliged to to actually have a fair and true account of the state of our business. And we don't. We are lying about the real systemic risks. It's against all principles of investor protection, against all principles of financial stability, and yet we don't do it. We have to change that, and not through a sustainability report. We have to do that, Maya, as you just said, we have to do it in our financial reports, because this is the financial reality that investors will be facing. And the second thing that we have to do, of course, we have to introduce a lot of incentives we have to take disincentives like harmful subsidies out. We have to make sure there is, of course, a carbon tax for agriculture. We have to make sure there is taxes for access and nitrogen application. But we also have to create increasingly incentives actually to invest into nature intangibles. And Singapore has a tax for a tax reduction if you do that. I mean, these costs are coming anyway. These costs are coming to public the budgets, and why not give each other as economic actors a positive incentive to do that? If we were doing that, then actually we would for the first time have the opportunity to basically take all these future risks onto our balance sheet as provisions, and then start investing against it and putting real money into Gabon, real money into healthy salts. And this is not just boring accountant technicalities. This is the philosophical moment where we turn nature from a cost into an asset, into a part of our wealth. And that's where we intuitively already are. 75% of you will have nature as a screensaver. Just think about that. There must be a reason for that. The way in which our economic interpretation and our intuitive interpretation of wealth have been diverging needs to be stopped and converging again. And I think for the first time we have this opportunity, but we won't find the solution in the old box.
So we won't find a solution in the old box, in the old financing system maybe. Stefan, you as one of the world's largest financiers of biodiversity, 4 billion active projects. I read you're protecting an area 5 times the size of Germany with this. Tell us a little how you view this moment. It's almost like a philosophical moment, no? It's like re-evaluating nature and putting it on the balance sheet and seeing it as an asset that's worth paying for. How do you view this from your lens?
Yeah, I'm just a banker, at least
one
person, the individual banker. But first of all, I think it's great to get together at this conference, and I think the endorsement by our EU President von der Leyen is terrific and shows the importance of what we discuss. However, I'm not a philosopher. I'm just a banker, but I share the concern, not only as a father of 4 kids, but as a human being. And I think there's a tragedy in our DNA or our software as human beings. And the one is we don't value the horizon, the long term. We are very, very bad in putting value to the long term. The tail risk we ignore. Most crises come, the financial crisis, it's all about the tail risk. We close the eye, we dance as long as the music plays. We are not good at it. So I hope AI will come into the boardroom and forces executives to deal with these tail risks. And of course, biodiversity is a tail risk, a liability, which increases every day, and we have the numbers. Secondly, from a game theory of perspective, we need to solve the conundrum that short-term, there's no incentive whatsoever to change your behavior. And that's a dilemma. We all know this. We are human beings, and I don't believe, as a non-philosopher, that this DNA will change, because it did make us to what we are today. And from my perspective, running KfW, we operate in 80 countries. We are the largest development bank, national development in the world. I would even add to climate and biodiversity definitely the social component. If we believe that with the only climate agenda / biodiversity agenda, we will create the change in many countries in this world, I think we are wrong-sided. So think it, including social, how do we create sustainable jobs, opportunities, and perspectives in many countries of this world. These people are not worse than us, right? We should not have this attitude from my perspective. And I think it's possible. It's possible if we focus on the investment gaps. So to give you the numbers, climate only by the end of this century, 27 trillion, 27.000 Milliarden, 27 trillion of investment requirements. Today we have already the 30% gap. Also, the compounding effect, we are not good in analyzing the compounding effect. Every year, an investment gap, 30%, will be exceptional. So this investment gap on climate, we need to address, and I think we can address it by government money and put new forms in leveraging private capital by providing guarantees, funds, diversification. What I learned in 30 years of working in the capital markets, global capital markets, what do investors like? They like liquidity, they like scale, and they like diversity. And we don't have this in all the areas we are speaking. We are very fragmented, we have no liquidity, and we have no risk-return profile because we have no data. And I also don't believe that we will change capital markets, right? At least not in my life. So therefore, we have to understand capital markets. We have to understand why an investment asset manager takes a certain decision, and therefore create products where there is demand. And that is not really happening. That is not really happening from my perspective. If we believe in liquidity and scale and impact, we need to think much bigger, and that requires a paradigm shift in collaboration. KfW is a national development bank. Under my leadership, clearly we put a lot of effort to cooperate with the World Bank, with the European Investment Bank, in the club of the leading 27 banks. There's a huge consensus, despite all the geopolitical, geoeconomic disruption, in this club, where China, India is representative, that this is a key priority. I have not been in any boardroom, I have not been with my peers where anybody disputed it. Which leads me to my final point. We need to create a narrative which speaks to 80% of the world population in order to come along with them. And I think, Maya, you rightly said the Green Deal in the meantime and transformation has negative connotations. Has negative connotations for many people outside this room. And we need to be very, very careful that we don't lose the majority of the people in the European Union to support this fantastic Green Deal, where a lot of people said this is the best which we have, right? At least I'm also a political animal after joining KfW in 3 years, and that is important. But understanding capital markets, designing products with risk shield return, and think at scale, I think it's a really, really key message, because our 4 billion in the global scheme, we are the global leader, which is terrific, and we can all be proud. But nevertheless, given the amount required, it's a small ship in the ocean.
You said like 27 trillion, and if you're the largest with 4 billion, we can also imagine like how the gap.
It's a small percentage, but we want to be a pioneer, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that Germany has the financial resources to address the 27 billion track, but we have the resources. We have 1,000 projects. We have experience of 76 years in the meantime. It's not my age. Thank you, Martin, but it's this experience, this share of knowledge and speed. Go for 80-20 solutions. Sometimes we are intellectually over-designing things instead of starting, getting 80%, and see whether the last 20% are economically viable. If not, let's move to the next problems. There are so many issues we have. I don't think we can afford 100% solutions.
I agree. I think the whole economically viable, how do you turn this, and also to your point, Martin, on the philosophical and the urgency, Johan, you just brought in, how do you turn this now, this like big gap, like daunting, somebody needs to fund this, into an actual commercial economic opportunity? That's a bit also the theme of the panel today, right? How do you actually bring it into competitiveness, we just heard, no? Like, what do we do as Europeans about this? So how do we view this as, in terms of a solution space? So what is the opportunity we have right here and now to turn it into an asset, into something attractive and investable? What would be unlocks from your point of view? Maybe we go one by one. Martin?
Look, given that it's the start also of a new mandate, let's embrace this agenda. Let's make it sort of a Humboldt moment of where we actually say, look, it's part of the European way of life actually to consider nature as part of our wealth. And I think one of the really good places to start is to also present it as an innovation, a science, a technology agenda. And now since last, when was it, Thursday, since Professor Strohschneider presented the SDA report, sort of what could a new model that the world will look at as a beacon in agriculture look like that comes from Europe, where actually we start turning things around and saying, in fact, the farmers, which is of course a particular concern where we have seen a lot of hardening and polarization, we redefine them actually from something like a peristatal provider of biomass into someone who is delivering nature capital and ecosystem service. We do this on a modern platform where they get not only the rewards but also their dignity back, and we see this as a major project actually to show how we in Europe are modernizing the way in we think how every square meter of land can provide benefit to society.
Bringing European farmers along would be a huge deal, I believe, for the next agenda.
Yes, I think we need to change the language. I think it's a question actually of merging a bit of what you're saying, Martin, on new economics and philosophy, but also Stefan on how banking can handle this. So one way forward, I think, is to be much more quantitative in terms of the fact that this is a subsidy to the global economy. It is the only reason why unsustainable, conventional, planet-damaging consumption and production is cheaper than sustainable efforts, which are out there and are scalable, is that the planet is subsidizing the conventional consumption and production system. There's no conventional economist, even in the camp of defending conventional business as usual, that likes subsidies. Everyone is against subsidies. Why would you allow that market failure to prevail? Of course you want to correct that. And that, I think, is the kind of pragmatism that we need to introduce very, very at the heart of the economy, because this is an unfair competition right now between those who are trying to handle nature in a proper way, while those who just allow the subsidy to continue. So that's kind of one part. But the second one, and I know that might feel as, for those of you who are kind of deep in the kind of nature camp, might feel as a bit uncomfortable. But I'm with you here that the urgency cannot allow us to wait for a new worldview, for new deep philosophies. We have to act so fast. And what is the area where we've come furthest? Well, it is in the climate policy space. So we have to use, I think, climate as the trampoline for action on nature. And we have to simply accept that that has become the reality in the conventional path of policy making. And the second lever or the vector is on health. Yeah. Human health and climate are perfect entry points to accelerate success on nature. At the hockey stick we seldom talk about is that over the past 40 years, the only rise of pandemics is zoonotic viral disease outbreaks, COVID-19 being one of them. Why does this occur? It's generalist species that come more and more contact with domestic animals through unsustainable exploitation of ecological habitats. You protect nature, you reduce risk of pandemics. That hits hard. That can be a traction which is much more powerful, unfortunately, than just the intrinsic values of nature, which of course are invaluable, but I think we have to take on that pragmatism. I hear the music. So over to you, Stefan.
Yes. Final words, Stefan, before we
I just said we dance as long as the music plays, so therefore maybe they are just playing. But a few observations on CO2 path. I think we have a deep understanding of what we have to do. We just should do is allow innovation, Green Deal, etc., but change the narrative and emphasize the positive, also economic impact. 2 weeks ago, I was in China, Peking. The air is clean. The number one topic in my conversation was circular economy. So the Chinese, by all geopolitical issues which we have, and I'm not in politics, they have clearly put this as a policy priority and see this as an economic opportunity, period. Yeah. So I'm less concerned on that area. I'm more concerned on those industries who go through a heavy transition. On nature, I think we are just at the starting point. I think we are far away from business cases, and we need business cases to attract private money. So therefore, the public sector has a huge role in accelerating regulation to the minimum, but I think the ECB has a focus on this, and banks play a crucial role because it's easier to regulate the bank sector than to regulate all the other industries. So I do understand why we have this important role, but we are prepared and ready to do so. And the second is also to embed this in our narrative, because nature, everybody loves nature. There's not a single human being who doesn't love nature. Biodiversity, people switch off. Now, that's a term which is too complex, but nature is such a positive thing. And I think we should use this. And I think also to be harsher if people don't comply. Right? I think that is also important, because we can't regulate everything but bad behavior. Now I'm hearing it's even getting louder.
To be harsher if people don't comply, I think that was the word. Thank you, gentlemen, for this lively discussion. If there's any questions.